Capiello here.
Tessie, you're present.
I'll second that.
Capiello, aye.
Tessie, aye.
Next item is staff update.
Just a couple of things for the board. As you'll see in your packets, if you haven't had a chance to review it, it's also attached to our agenda for those of you in the audience that would like to look online as well. There's a link to it. There's some changes for the planning and zoning laws in 2023. A guide for municipalities, and it goes over of the summaries of changes and when they go into effect. We can discuss this at a future work session, but I just wanted everybody to have a copy of it in case you did not. And another quick thing to note, we're finishing up our housing master plan chapter. We're finalizing our goals tomorrow for the housing chapter, and then they'll go to a rough draft, and they'll come before the planning board for their public hearing. Anticipate in April or May. If anybody has any other questions or anything else for me, those are the quick updates I have.
I failed to mention that we also have with town planner, Vanessa Price, Barbara Irvine, our administrative assistants in the land use department, and Laura Spector-Morgan, our town attorney. Next item is action items. Number A, cases from February 6, 2024. Case 240-8-NR-223-sub parentheses 23 owner Young Road LLC.
It's on.
Good evening.
How are you? Mr. Chair, members of the board, my name is Christopher Berry with Berry Surveying and Engineering, representing the applicant here this evening. With me tonight is Justin Passe from DTC Attorneys, and of course the applicant, Paul Thibodeau. We don't have a whole lot of new items to present to you this evening, so my presentation will be brief. The board asked that we prepare the open space documentation for the project and define areas for the open space on site. Justin and his office have taken care of that for us and submitted it to you for your review. We've also defined on the subdivision plans areas that would be open to the public. And what I've tried to do is demonstrate that not only in the project drawings, but also in the color renderings that we provided. All of the areas in bright red that is adjacent to the existing eased parcel owned by the town is proposed to be open to the public. And that would include a strip of land that entails the existing trail down to Young Road. And then there are other smaller areas of the open space that would be exclusive to the landowners within the subdivision, specifically areas directly adjacent to those lots in the subdivision and areas that are adjacent to sort of the sides, both the east and the west side of the property. But all of the other areas would be proposed or are proposed to be open to the public. One of the other items that the board discussed at the last meeting, and this you can see on the sort of the blown up version of the color rendering, is the board asked if we would be amenable to providing some additional parking. Currently, there is no parking on site, and to avoid parking on the roadways, we have proposed a small parking area that would hold 4 cars, have a drive aisle in, and allow people to not back out onto Young Road, but pull out front forward, and has appropriate sight distance in both directions on Young Road. A couple of other minor revisions to the plan, and we've highlighted on the color rendering There was one lot in the subdivision that did not have direct access to the open space. That's lot 8-17, and so we've provided an access easement over 8-16 to gain access to the open space. But all other lots have either direct access by touching the open space on a long border, or as you'll remember, during one of our previous planning board meetings, we pointed out that we created connecting tails so that people could access the open space over land that they owned and controlled. So unless there's questions concerning that or the documents, we really don't have anything new to present to you this evening.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from the board? Everybody's mic on?
Well, thank you for putting in those parking spaces. That was a concern. So thank you for that. I have a comment with reviewing the environmental impact assessment, that report. It specifically says that it does not look at rare, threatened, or endangered species. So that has not been done on the property.
No, it wasn't done as part of that process. At the time, it was not required. If the project does go to additional state permitting, then that would be reviewed at the time at that state level.
Because it is in our ordinance 7.6.4 and around wildlife.
It discusses the fact that you can ask for that. That environmental impact assessment was provided about 2-3 months ago now, and there were no questions raised at the time.
Right, so I'm raising that question now about why that wasn't done.
Because it wasn't required for the project itself, and the board didn't specifically ask for it at the time.
I think she's asking for it now.
Okay, we can certainly do that, but I think it's a little disingenuous that we've got this report, had this report for months now, and now we're being asked for additional information on a report when there's been no discussion on the report since then.
Point taken, but I am interested in it.
Anything else, Joyce, at the moment? Mr. Knapp, did you have some comments?
I always have comments. So in looking through this, as well as some information that was provided back through our town engineer, there was a specific note around the AOT. So one thing I'd like to comment on that is making sure that should it be determined that an AOT is needed, that all state and local permits are filed appropriately with that.
Understood.
Especially based on looking at the road, the driveways, and the cuts. And then when you add the cuts and the fills, I think it's probably pretty close, but we'll go based on the calculations that you have on it.
And just to follow up on that, we agree that if the Alteration of Terrain Bureau comes back and requires that we file a permit, we'd be happy to file the permit.
The watershed analysis, there was one of the pieces that the town engineer called out was that looking at the analysis, it includes the entire Richardson Pond, so it looks at 1,000+ acre watershed, as opposed to the impact of developing 20 acres or the developable land that's being there, and that is more directly related to our impact and something we actually would like to see, and we should see. That's something that should be presented to us before we make a notice of decision on it, not as a moment, as an item tied to our notice of decision.
Do you want me to respond to that, Chair?
Please.
So the Barrington subdivision regulations require that we provide an analysis that determines that we don't have an impact or a deleterious impact on downstream water bodies. It doesn't tell us how we provide that information to the board, and it doesn't tell us how we would provide that analysis for CMA's review. We think that doing a global analysis is sufficient for meeting the requirements and the regulations in the town of Barrington. As you take these analyses and you cut them smaller and smaller and smaller, they may have different results. But as I pointed out in our response back to CMA, any other analysis that we would do that would look at downstream impacts would also look at the total impact within the watershed. And this, unfortunately for us, our analysis point is Richardson Pond at our boundary line. And so we would look at the water that flows to that, and that includes all the offsite areas. So I don't know that your regulations require, and I don't know that general engineering practice requires that we do a finite analysis on smaller areas within the watershed.
But our regulations do require that under our stormwater management plan.
The stormwater regulations require that we have sediment erosion control analysis and stormwater analysis for areas that are 20,000 square feet or more. And we've provided all of the information that would be required under that ordinance.
Also under our drainage and erosion plan, there's 7.2.1.
Which was provided as part of our project plans.
Based on the larger scale, should be based on the development of the lots, as also pointed out by.
The provided sediment erosion control plans are all based around site-specific features that we've designed for the driveways, and we've provided site-specific sediment erosion control devices on each one of the lots. We are not going to develop each one of the lots so that we can provide every single piece of sediment erosion control device that we would do as part of standard construction. That is a site plan. This is a residential subdivision that creates subdivision lots. We have provided what the ordinance requires that we provide on this type of project.
The ordinance specifically calls out under 7.2 parents 2 that the applicant shall submit such plans to the board for any tract of land being developed where one or more of the following conditions are proposed or present: standard agricultural harvest timbers practices are exempt from the regulation, and it specifically notes in there conditions are proposed or present. It doesn't say that it has to be done at that time. It says it's proposed.
I don't understand what the meaning of that is.
Go ahead.
Maybe you said before, the direction that goes Sorry about that. You said that, your plan was just for the roads and the stuff that you're doing and the construction down the road.
That's not what I said.
What do you say?
So we have site-specific sediment erosion control and stormwater details for the areas of construction that we have specific detail for. We have general sediment erosion control details within the plan set on each one of the lots to show how somebody could do that in the future. So we're not negating the fact that that is required in each one of the lots.
But under our erosion and sediment control plan through our stormwater management plan, it says the purpose of this plan is to address the effects of the proposed, not the developed, the proposed development of the existing stormwater drainage system and capacity. Plans will often be required in conjunction with an erosion and sediment control,
Which we have provided.
we're asking for the impact on the 20 specific lots that are, or 20 specific acres that are.
I think we're talking about two separate things here. You're bringing this back to trying to force an applicant to do a stormwater analysis on a highly specific area and mixing that with sediment erosion control features that we do show on a plan. Those are two separate topics.
Like stormwater management, but you say that's what you do, that what you're showing us just for the development you're doing, home construction down the road, stormwater management. Is that what you said, Chris? I'm just trying to.
The stormwater management plan is essentially a sediment erosion control plan. We have that shown on our project site, and on all of the lots within the subdivision. The stormwater analysis is a global analysis that we conducted. Those are two separate things.
You're also impacted under 731 parents 3. You look at the thresholds for plan requirements, and at 731 parents 3 talks about disturbed environmentally sensitive areas.
Which is another reason we show these sediment erosion control devices.
Your project is not the 1,000 acre watershed, it's the
That's
20 acres.
That's
that
not
you're
what that
intending
section,
to
that's
develop.
not what that section is referring to. We're mixing two portions of the ordinance.
Saying it was called out by our engineer.
And I politely responded and said that I disagree.
Disagree.
But when you say you're showing them, you're showing on what, sheet 66, 7 and 68?
No, well, those are the actual construction details.
Exactly, right.
But the rest of the plan set does show sediment erosion control features on each one of the lots within the subdivision.
So I think what you're hearing Mr. Knapp say is he appreciates that you've responded politely to what the engineer has requested, but you haven't actually provided what he requested. And that's certainly your choice, but I think what the board is saying is they would like to see a response.
So how do you expect us to respond other than design out each one of these building lots, grade them out, and then analyze them for stormwater? And why has this never once been required as part of that same section?
I don't think the board could fairly or effectively comment on any other potential or proposed project that has been before the board. It is a review of the project that is before us, the known sensitivity of the land that's here, and what we're requesting for this specific project, because that's what's before us right now.
I think this is a little different too, that they're selling the lots and then construction happened by somebody else, but normally, full enchilada. Properties, buildings along with the development, that's typically what I've seen since I've been here. This is different that you're selling the lots, you're letting somebody buy the lot and then build the house the way they want.
No, I don't think so. I think most of the subdivisions that we conduct in the town of Barrington don't have builder tie-ins. And we create many lots that don't have these requirements that we grade out and show site features on how somebody may build out a lot at some point in the future. So I disagree with that.
I guess where I'm having trouble is if you look at a regulation of the subdivision 7.3, stormwater management plan, it says development and eventual development, or eventual development. So it seems to contemplate that, the developer is responsible for the homes that are going to be put there down the road, because that's the eventual development. That's what you're doing it for. So to say, it seems to me that, if I do it one way, I'm responsible for everything. If I do another way, I'm not. I think is not the intent of the regulations.
I think we're misunderstanding what stormwater management plan means. The stormwater management plan is essentially a sediment and erosion control analysis of the site to make sure that we do not have laden runoff leaving the project site. We have provided the details within the plan set for that. A stormwater analysis is different, and we keep mixing those two things together, and they are not the same thing.
What do you think 7.3 refers to?
Sediment and erosion control.
It's labeled stormwater management plan.
Well, 7.3.4 does have specific plan requirements, so why don't we talk about those and what you believe is not included? And perhaps the engineer can weigh in as well and tell us what he thinks is not included.
I think the approach that was used is not typical. Usually a watershed analysis would be focused on the area itself being developed. And by looking at the overall watershed, impacts of this specific project are insignificant, they're minor. They didn't even show up at all. And typically, like I said, you would look at the area itself being developed and treat and manage that stormwater so that your pre and post flows are the same, and all the flows leaving the site are treated by some method. Typically how it, and this is unusual that it was not.
That's not what she just asked us to do then. So if we move through the ordinance, we can determine where we've fallen short, then I'm happy to fix it.
On the site plan.
When you suggested that some of the provided documents show management on the driveways, for example, looking at driveway for lot 8-8 and 8-9, which continues down to lot 9 and 10, it does show the topography that allows you to reach the 10% grade, but it really doesn't suggest anything else. I guess the concern would be if that 10% driveway has nothing at the end of it but an entrance to two houses, but all the stormwater that's going to go down, course down that driveway with any pollutants that may be on the driveway. It just shows at the end you've got, I don't know, a 12-foot drop to the regular terrain. I'm not understanding how anything is controlled or even attempted to be controlled.
So as an example, on sheet 23 of 68, in that same plan, that plan shows silt sock, silt fence, sediment erosion control details, all to control the amount of flow coming off from that particular surface. If you look at sheet 24, same thing. Stormwater controls for all of the grading shown on all the lots within that plan.
Which sheet are you on?
24 of 68, 25 of 68 shows the same thing. The end of the proposed joint driveway, grading, all of the sediment erosion control that would be required on that driveway, all the sediment erosion control that would be required on the lots. Each sheet after that is formatted in the same way.
I mean, Chris, I'm not seeing that. I mean, I'm looking at page 24. Well, I'm looking at page 24, but you said mention 24. There's a long driveway that goes down, and what is controlling the flow at the end of it? I don't see anything.
We have siltation controls shown down the entire perimeter. It's shown around the end of the proposed hammerhead at the end of it, all the way back up. It shows sediment erosion control details on each one of the lots all the way down. There's a line that calls SF. It talks about slope stabilization methods. It talks about each one of those controls.
Is that construction details though? Is that construction or is that for construction?
Yes.
What about afterwards?
Once these areas are stabilized, there's no reason for stormwater controls on them.
So on that long driveway, the runoff, as you show, we go into that tree line that's there on either side. That's the control.
The control is during construction, and then post-construction, the stormwater runoff has no sediment in it because it's stabilized. The stormwater runoff that comes off from those areas would then filter down through the woods.
And that is true at the end where the hammerhead is to the two bottom lots? Any comment from the engineer? Okay. So the two ones he's talking about.
And let's be careful with the chitter chatter.
Okay. I'm sorry, we didn't hear that.
So, yes,
Comments on what he's presented, please.
and Chris is showing erosion control at the end of the driveways so the stormwater coming down the driveways hits the erosion control, whether it's silt, they call it silt fence and erosion control berm mix. So yes, it is shown
For construction or after construction? Just for during construction, right?
just during construction. Yes, that would go away presumably after construction. So how that's being addressed after post-construction, whether it's not apparently treated afterwards, that'd be,
I mean, that's really my question. What happens after construction? Flows down there, and what happens is a mystery?
at this
I mean,
point, yes.
You've got a bunch of impervious surface there that's gonna flow down.
Mhm.
You have serious sheet flow going.
Correct. It would
Something's
be.
got, it's gotta happen. Once it leaves the pavement, something's gotta happen to it, right? So,
Not necessarily. Not every piece of stormwater has to be detained some way before it's discharged.
how long is this drive? You got some seriously long driveways that you have a pretty steep grade though.
This one's 300 feet.
10% grade, on one's 8 and one's 10.
Correct. This one's, the one I'm looking at right now is 10%.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that to say that we built the driveway and we're done, and then you got all this stormwater going down. To me, it's a concern. Particularly where, you know, you're gonna pick up, if you do have erosion off of the driveway going down to the pond,
Richardson.
which is whatever.
Yeah. Prime wetland. Yeah, my concern is once the driveway is put in and any particulates that fall off any pools and salt and sand,
Well, even that,
it's
even,
all,
you know, you're gonna have a lot of rain coming down that
Right,
track.
yeah.
So that alone can cause a lot of erosion.
Right.
Unless you get something controlled at the end, it's gonna channel and take erosion.
it's not like you have water bars on the driveway or anything. to
Correct.
Push it off.
Yeah, I would think that there'd be something in the driveway, post-construction, and when the lots develop, that kind of stuff. And this is a different situation where you're constructing a portion of the infrastructure now, and the rest of the development's happening afterwards when the lots are sold off. Usually that would be thought out as an entire project.
Well, I think that's what to me, that's what our regulations envision. Where it says development and eventual development. I think it's holding the developer responsible for that, for stuff that's happening after you sell the lots. I mean, you gotta have some way to make sure that, you know, you're gonna push that on the homeowner, they're gonna put in erosion control on their property.
During construction, they do, yes.
I'm saying after construction.
That's the whole point of the 20,000 square feet. Any lot that develops more than 20,000 square feet requires these regulations.
I'm saying after construction, when the driveway's done, what happens to the water that goes flowing down those driveways? Whose responsibility is that?
It's the homeowner's responsibility, just like it's the responsibility of every homeowner in this room to manage the
I think,
stormwater
Chris,
that
I
comes off
read
their
regulation
driveway.
where it says you're responsible for development and eventual development. I don't think you can pass it on to the home. That's part of the developer responsibility.
So we can design ponds, we can design treatment cells, we can capture the flow. That's their responsibility also. How's that any different? Keep saying we're passing things on to the homeowner. Eventually, the homeowner has to manage all of these things. So whether the sheet flows off from the driveway down through the woods naturally, or whether we capture it, treat it somehow, and discharge it, the homeowner has to maintain it anyway.
The HOA usually responds.
There is no HOA. There's no HOA to manage
We'll
each
get to
one of
that.
these lots.
That's a requirement of the requirement. HOA.
The HOA for the open space, but an HOA in the sense of who's gonna manage stormwater on each one of these lots.
But we have had projects in the past where the ponds and stuff that collected from the whole development, the responsibility of the HOA. And we've seen that before. And to say that, this project doesn't require or shouldn't have it, I think it's inconsistent with what we've seen in the past.
I think you have a lot more common ownership of infrastructure on those projects that requires that. This is a frontage subdivision that's spread out across the frontage. That's the difference.
The requirement of our conservation subdivision is that there has to be a homeowners association.
Well, I misspoke when I said we wouldn't have an HOA. We hadn't contemplated having an HOA manage the stormwater on each individual homeowner. We did contemplate managing the open space as part of the open space subdivision.
So nobody's responsible for it.
No, the homeowner is ultimately responsible. Your point is that the homeowner is going to be responsible for their driveway. Yes, they're going to be responsible for their driveway. And they're going to be responsible for the flow that comes off from the driveway and any erosion that might take place as part of that, just like you and I are as part of our home ownership. So,
I don't know if I buy that. I think where you're putting the roads in, you're selling the lots, and
They're not gonna.
our regulations say that the developer is responsible for development and eventual development. I don't think you can walk away from that responsibility.
So are we saying that there's to be an HOA that's developed within this subdivision that is to manage each one of the driveways? as
I
part of
think
the project?
what we're talking about is for the added impervious surfaces, the impact of stormwater that's gonna happen from that. Project should deal with that.
I think that the board is talking about it's the developer's responsibility to design, install these stormwater management tools. And then, yes, it would be the homeowners association to maintain those tools. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
And that's what, we've seen that before with this big stormwater management, system. And the HOA is responsible, not, if it's buying my land or on my land, I'm not responsible. HOA is, I think. I think that would be,
And what Mr. Barry is saying is that makes sense when those facilities are on common area or in a condominium where there aren't individual lots. But here, where that's happening on individual lots, it does make sense that the individual homeowner would be responsible for maintaining any systems on their individual lot.
I would agree with that once the lots have been sold and developed, but while they sit feral or farrow, is there waiting for a developer to purchase or a developer to purchase them or a homeowner to purchase them? They have to have a method to be maintained in common and maintained appropriately through the developer with assurances of the homeowners association over the top of it.
So what you are envisioning is that the developer here is going to build all these driveways, and then later someone's going to come in and build a house. It's not that the driveway and the house are going to be built simultaneously. Is that the plan? Please tell us what the plan is.
The plan is to install the aprons to ensure that the aprons are constructed per the plan, ensure that we have adequate site distance, and then future owners of the lots are to develop the driveways. We've stated that a few times now.
But the driveway should be designed with some stormwater management plan, particularly the ones with a steep slope. So
I
that
think
when
so,
the
too.
driveway is installed, that is installed with it.
I think the engineering should be done so that the homeowner knows if they're responsible for putting these things in place, that should be a condition of the sale. They should understand what those requirements are. So it should be designed.
Right.
So that, you can't sell me something and then, oh, by the way, you're responsible for driveway. And I think that what I'm getting when I buy this land, I should understand what disclosure. If I'm responsible for stormwater management, then that should be something that I should be able to look at and say, here's what I'm required to do. I understand that. I'm going to buy the property. I'm not going to be surprised down the road and say, you guys didn't do me well. To me, to say that, I'm doing development this way, so I have to do the stuff I normally have to do. And we should just accept it because, chose to do it this way. Maybe our answer should be, well, you can't do it this way. If you're trying to skirt regulations and skirt requirements, maybe our reply should be, well, don't do it this way. I think that making sure that the stormwater management off this site to a sensitive area is dealt with appropriately and engineered, I think is something we should have.
I have no response to that. I've given you my response already.
Mr. Ness, did you have your hand raised?
No, I didn't have my hand raised. I was probably just itching my face, but we thoroughly beaten that one. I figure since we're on homeowners association, we may talk about it. The last time we met, I specifically raised that item in our conversation about a homeowners association, and it had not been provided. We were since provided with a declaration of something or other here. Declarant, what's that?
Restrictions and covenants?
Yeah, it was a declarant.
Yeah,
As
it's
sole
disclosure,
discretion.
number 2,
Declarant,
declaration of
yeah.
covenants.
Signed in a declarant sole discretion. Our standard specifically under a conservation subdivision 6.3.5 states that a homeowners association is required.
Mr. Chair, board, my name is Justin Pessay. Does anyone mind if I sit here?
Sure.
But if you wouldn't mind just bringing the microphone to you so it
sure.
can pick up the record. Thank you. Make sure the light is green.
You got a green light.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you all for your time and thank you for the explanation tonight. I have questions on what we just talked about, the stormwater and the sedimentation and stuff, which I guess we can get back to. Happy to answer this question. I think it gets back to what Laura was talking about and what Chris were talking about with regard to the proposal for the form of ownership here. So as I put on page 5 of our response, which was an attempt to address some of the many concerns that were raised at the January hearing, Article 6, I think, as you said, Mr. Knapp, 6.3.5 states that as a condition of approval, the applicant for a conservation subdivision shall be required to provide for the establishment of a homeowners association. But I note the words after that, or similar entity, to manage in perpetuity all land and improvements within the subdivision that are to be owned in common. So when you read that in conjunction with the requirements in the subdivision regulations, which lay out the different options for how a conservation subdivision can manage the open space that's being proposed, which regulations specifically call for the owner of the land holding on to the fee simple interest, which is what's proposed here. I think you get to a situation where you're addressing the uniqueness of this property. The property is a frontage subdivision. It's conservation by technicality, but it's a frontage subdivision. And I think that's where a lot of the conversation that's being had tonight is getting hung up. When you think about requirements like erosion control and sediment control plans and stormwater management contemplation, you're in a subdivision, you're usually talking about a new subdivision road, et cetera. Here, we're talking about frontage lots on a road that exists already. And so in the context of 6.3.5, we are proposing a similar entity. And in reality, as proposed right now, there's not infrastructure like detention ponds or retention ponds where there needs to be an entity that exists where collectively everybody contributes to it and they take care of the infrastructure, which is what happens in a lot of traditional subdivisions. That's just not the case here. And that's why an association felt unnecessary because of the nature of the proposal. Rather, what we thought we would do and what we proposed and detailed in our letter is something consistent with what Paul did across the street for the 14 lots across the street. So there's a declaration of covenants and restrictions, which outlines the uses of each of the individual 23 lots. It also references the 31-acre open space that's proposed to be conveyed in an easement, conservation easement, to the town to be managed by the Conservation Commission. as well as the 8 odd acres or so, which would be essentially for the exclusive use of the lot owners. So there's no infrastructure there that requires an association to manage or take care of. There's no infrastructure in the public open space that requires an association to take care of or manage it. And as we just talked about, I think, the obligation of the individual homeowners who own the individual sites would be to manage the stormwater on their property, which is why I think you see in the proposed conditions of approval a requirement that before a building permit is issued, a stormwater management plan is developed for each individual lot. So you've got, the essence of the regulations, which we've been talking about when it comes to erosion control, which relate to construction and development being addressed by the plans already provided. And then you have a requirement for the owner of the property or future owner of the property when developing and before a building permit is pulled to provide a stormwater management plan for that individual lot. So to the extent that there's infrastructure associated with that, it doesn't make much sense for there to be an association managing it or contributing fees to maintain it. It would be the obligation of that owner, which I think is probably consistent with all of our individual experiences. If you own a single family lot, it's your job.
But-
I'm sorry, but I have two comments on that. Well, number one, across the street, there's a road drainage between that. This does not have that. Number two, you're calling this a frontage subdivision, and it's got, how many backlots do you have on this thing? I mean, this is not a frontage thing. It's got
8 backlots.
8 backlots. So to say this is a frontage subdivision is really not accurate. I don't think you can say that and say, oh, it's all frontage. It's not. I mean, by the way, I don't think, we only allow 2 backlots. So, this is problematic for a number of reasons. So it's not a frontage thing. You got 8 backlots out of 23. And only 2 backlots are allowed on that subdivision. So, we're talking about stormwater management. That's another problem with this, number one, that I have with this. So that's a concern I have with this particular presentation.
Well, certainly, I understand the point. We are referencing the fact that it's a frontage subdivision to try to draw the distinction between the types of considerations which usually go into reviewing a conservation subdivision and the types of considerations which usually go into reviewing a traditional frontage subdivision for a road that already exists. But the bottom line is that this is a conservation subdivision. It was approved in the substantially similar format of the way that it's before this board right now by the ZBA for this specific layout. And the difference being that there's 3 less curb cuts than the plan that was before the ZBA in January of last year.
What we're talking about here, there were subdivision regulations, which we have purview over, not the ZBA. These are subdivision regulations we're talking about, not zoning regulations.
Sure.
So to say the zoning board, made a decision, it's a done deal, I agree with that. We have subdivision regulations that we decide on.
Well, I think part of the spirit of our letter in responding to and it gets to the point, the discussion we just had. Article 7 of the Barrington subdivision regulations, which includes the grading, erosion, and sediment control plan requirements, as well as the stormwater management requirements, they point to Article 13, where there are specific design standards. I think the position of the applicant would be that the plans that have been provided and the discussion that's been had with CMA indicate a compliance with those provisions. If that's not the view of the board, it would be very helpful to know specifically, looking at the design standards in Article 13, what's not met, so that internally the applicant can look at that and determine either, hey, maybe this is already met, take a look at this sheet, or, oh no, that isn't met, we need to come into compliance with that.
And I think that's what the board's trying to do tonight.
That would be
was
very helpful.
Sort of the conversation we had ahead of time. So we hit a lot of topics here.
Yep.
So the homeowners association for the common areas, I appreciate there's not a lot of common areas, and you're hoping the Conservation Commission will take an easement to the open space that's open to the public.
Right.
But there is open space that is reserved just for the individual lot owners, and someone's going to need to manage that. So it does need to be a homeowners association or similar entity. It doesn't have to be called a homeowners association. You can call it a banana for all I care, but there's got to be some sort of entity that maintains that open space, including the other open space in the event the Conservation Commission doesn't want it.
I would also point out in the Declaration of Covenants, it specifically kicks the responsibility to the town and You can't
It
do
gives you,
that.
it gives you the option, but not the responsibility.
But the declaration of responsibility specifically says it will be the town's responsibility.
No, it says the town may, but need not.
Don't worry about it.
I don't necessarily, that's
All right, let's look at it.
what I wrote. Read.
Shall be interpreted to create the right, but not the obligation of the town to enforce the restrictions. It's on page 5.
Okay.
No, under costs and liabilities, also under it, the town agrees to bear all costs and liabilities for any kind related to the operation, upkeep, and maintenance of the property, and to defend, hold harmless, and release the grantor from and against any and all actions, claims, damages, liabilities, or expenses that may be asserted by any person or entity, including the public at large, related thereto.
Where are you reading?
I am reading under the conservation easement deed that is attached to the back end of this.
I did not look at the conservation easement deed.
It specifically calls that out, that it is the town agrees to bear the responsibility.
And if the town were to take a conservation easement over the property, that makes sense. So we can talk about that separately.
And it also notes under the maintenance of the easement shall be the sole responsibility of the town.
Again, if the town takes the conservation easement, yes, that is how a conservation easement works.
And then under.
I understand we have members of the Conservation Commission here tonight. I suppose they'll probably weigh in on this. I also want to touch the backlot issue. That is an issue that has not been previously identified. The conservation subdivision regulations, both in the zoning ordinance and in the subdivision regulations, provide that if the conservation subdivision regulations do not specifically address something, you default to the conventional subdivision requirements. That does limit it to 2 backlots. So you would need a variance and a waiver to have this many backlots. And the other thing we were still talking about the stormwater management. So I just didn't want to lose my train of thought on all of those things.
Sticking with the documents related to declaration of, what are we calling it now? The declaration of covenants.
Yep.
It makes reference to number 7, signs, and it says, notwithstanding paragraph A above, declarant reserves the right to place signs on the property advertising lot and home sales, and its preferred builder. The number and size of the sign shall be the declarant's sole discretion. We have a sign ordinance and zoning.
It will have to comply with the sign ordinance.
Yep. With, and it should be noted in compliance with the Barrington sign ordinance.
Sure.
Or before we move too far afield of the point you made a second ago about the interplay between the subdivision regs and the zoning ordinance, can you tell me what provision we're talking about? So I'm not prepared to talk about that.
No, I completely
tonight,
understand that, and I anticipate we're going to have further conversations.
Yeah.
It's 6.3.3 of the zoning ordinance. And where's my subdivision regulations?
10.2.
10.2 of the subdivision regulations.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I would point out that we've discussed this quite a bit. The code enforcement officer in the past, conservation subdivision. Determination that these are not backlots. Subdivision.
I understand that that was his determination. I do not believe the plan is bound by that determination.
You went to the ZBA for relief from Article 4.1.3 called backlots to allow access through the front buffer. So I guess you're acknowledging that they are backlots by doing that?
I didn't hear you, John.
So I think the variance relief was 3 variances from 6.2.6, which is the 100-foot buffer requirement, and then Article 4, Section 1.3
Was a special
Labeled
exception.
backlots.
was a special exception. Is that what you're referring to, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman?
that was called the relief from the backlots to allow for shared access points and shared driveways through the front buffer.
Okay, I mean, certainly we'll pull the thread on this. It's a discussion we'll have to have. I mean, I'll have to get smart on the discussions that were had with the building inspector and the code enforcement officer, because I consider those administrative determinations which have been made and not appealed. So we'll have to look at that, about how that impacts the plan going forward.
Yeah, in your letter, actually, you do mention I know Chris had said Article 11 does not, should not be brought into this discussion. But on page 8 of your letter, you do cite Article 11, Section 11.2, Article 11, 11.2, to regulate shapes and site layout. But by pulling part of Article 11 and acknowledging it as relevant, you have to go through all of Article 11. Pardon me, I have a little sore throat here.
I think the
Including 11.2 for parentheses 1, 2 back lots, a maximum per subdivision, period.
certainly we'll look at that. I mean, to the extent that Article 11, and specifically Section 11.2 appears in the letter, it was addressing a comment made by the planning board. Yeah.
Okay.
Were there other issues the board wanted to bring up? I know one of the issues Ron had brought up was building envelopes.
Yeah, do you want to go for that, Ron? It was an item I had addressed last time when we talked about subdivision only. I referenced it, I think, as subdivision as to I'm sorry, I referenced it as site plan as opposed to subdivision. And when we talk about our subdivision, 5.3.2, parents 18, we talk about the building envelope. And bear with me as I just flip to my appropriate section here. I wasn't going to rewrite everything. I just, or if you want to hop in, Ron, Phil.
And Justin, just so you know, we had a consultation with council before this. I had a good opportunity to understand a lot of the board's concerns that I hadn't understood before tonight either. And so what I encouraged them to do tonight was to identify all the concerns they had so that you all can decide whether you want to go back and address those, whether you want to say, okay, give us a decision anyway,
Right.
Or how you want to proceed. So this isn't an effort to like throw a million things at you and blindside you. This really is an effort to identify the issues that the board has so that we can get to yes.
No, I appreciate that, and all we're looking for is a roadmap. These
Yeah.
discussions are great. They have a tendency to become very academic, and all of a sudden, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to just drill down and
Yeah.
say, what specific provision are we talking about? Where have we not met or complied with that regulation?
Yep.
And maybe we have a different opinion on
Yeah,
whether
sure.
or not we have
Yeah.
or not.
Yeah.
But that's another item altogether. So I appreciate
And my thought
the
would
sentiment.
also be that we do a letter summarizing
Yep.
at the end of this, either Vanessa can draft it or I can draft it, summarizing all the issues we've identified so we can all be on the same page.
That would be very helpful. Yeah.
So it makes a reference to the plan shall delineate potential building envelope each class that represents regulatory and environmental restraints in the placement of dwelling unit structures on the lot. And when we are talking about our building envelope, we have a broad idea of where it is, but no clarity in placement.
So on each one of the lots, we show the setbacks for each one of the lots. Shown how structures could fit on each of those envelopes. I'm not sure how to sort of.
There's no wetland implications here that you would want to be concerned with, right? I mean, there's no full buffers or wetlands on them.
That's just one of the requirements for submission.
I guess if we're showing the setbacks of the individual zoning district that we're in, presumably the house can go in there as long as you're not putting the structure in the setback. That's the envelope.
Or are you looking on to that?
To me, I mean, where it says represents regulatory and environmental restraints, so to me, I want to see that you can get a septic system on there, you can get a well in there. That, okay,
Throughout the plans, we show 4,000 square foot leaching areas. Sites.
There was there were a couple of concerns that we had, and I guess it's probably best to give them as a note on it, is that when I look at septic design, standard septic design, which I know will go to the state for, there are some pretty significant slopes that have to be contended with. Plus, when you look at a Vector truck being able to come in and suck them out, in some cases, the driveway is more than 20 feet higher than where the septic and leaching field.
on these sites. And a typical Vector truck is designed for something with, so it's gonna be a challenge to actually manage these.
It feels like a developer concern. I mean, if there's a regulatory implication to what you're saying, Mr. Knapp, that would be helpful to see that in the regulation, but it feels like a concern of the developer.
My concern is when you look at the lot layout, as we specifically talk about the building envelope and the layout, these lots are designed to utilize adjacent lots to meet the loading well and septic design. And when you look at how the placement of a structure in connection with a septic system or sewage disposal system is going to tie in with this, it may actually make it so that it can't be done. And so you have a lot that's proposing a septic here, but maybe the septic needs to be, it can't meet that based on the location of how this is set up.
So a couple things there. If we're showing a well, 4,000 square foot area for suitable leaching area and a proposed home, I don't understand how we're utilizing adjacent lots to meet the. Show a 4,000 square foot leaching area at the back of the site as part of a subdivision approval, septic system in the front of the lot as part of the home site design. I don't know why that matters.
I believe what Mr. Knapp is referring to in terms of using other sites is the well radiuses
Yes.
appear to go off the sites. And I know that's often fine, but I think that is the concern. I am seeing all the leach fields. To me, they look like they're all on the sites.
Yes, they are, but
Okay,
they're,
so it's the
they're
well
all to
radiuses.
the back of the sites.
Yep.
And the question is, can you actually get it all there? And we're trying to base that assessment of our regulations on what we're being shown for a proposed plan.
So what information would you be looking for to demonstrate? I mean, there were test pits and they would have to go to the state for septic approval. So what additional information would you be looking for?
Is from the height of the driveway down to where the.
You're concerned about the
septic-
pumping.
Yes. Will it actually be able to meet the pumping standards?
Sure, we can have Paul talk to a contractor about this. Are we otherwise able to put the 5.3.2 Friends 18 issue to bed? I mean, again, I want to focus on what, at some point, the owner of these individual lots have to get an approved septic plan from the state. If that does not align with and accommodate a house in the lot, then there's been some bad planning for a long time. So that is a developer risk. That's a developer issue. If there's a regulation in the subdivision regulations which address this concern, we're happy to look at it. But I think if we're showing the setbacks, and if we have the appropriate soils, and we have the well radius, and we have the leaching field on individual lots, haven't we met the subdivision regulation requirement in that context?
My concern is that there have been other projects that have been forced to come back for zoning board afterward because of the way they were prepped and designed, and that should not be the case in a new subdivision. You should not have to go for afterward. I find that to actually be unacceptable.
So what variants are you concerned they might need? Because this is all in the subdivision regs, right?
It is, but I don't know exactly what's gonna.
Yeah.
It may be tied to location and placement. It could be to the driveway and the well, and I have concern based on our driveway regulations on that. But I'll come around the horn after.
Mhm.
So
I mean,
I don't know where it's going to kick
Yeah.
off, but we have had other projects that have been forced to go to ZBA for.
And I will say this, you can design the best subdivision in the world and things happen. And you get out on the site and it just can't be built the way you designed it. I don't think there's any amount of planning or approvals or regulating you can do to prevent that. So as we discussed, I think if there's a specific regulation that's not being met, we need to identify that. But these broader concerns about, you know, the buyers knowing what they're getting and things like that, that may be exceeding your authority.
I guess in my world, I'm not allowed to fail like that, so
I
you have to actually prove that it can be done.
Okay.
And we have hypotheticals, but nothing that actually says, hey, here's how it actually plays.
Okay, so what are you looking for?
Just something that will show that the septic will actually be able to function the way it's designed to. And then if you have to force the movement of a septic field on a lot, does it actually impact a well radius or another? Do you create a hardship because of the movement of it?
And I guess what I'm trying to understand is tangibly, what can they give you that would satisfy that concern? Is there some sort of report? Is there some sort of expert? I mean, they're not going to design every single
Right.
septic system right now.
Mhm.
So we need to tell them what you need to be comfortable.
Septic expert.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Now, if you are concerned, we can send the plan to a septic expert and ask the septic expert to provide the board with an opinion.
Well, we have our engineer. Figure maybe I could ask Josh if he has some input on this since we're.
I think you did speak to talking to a septic pump company to find out what their limitations are. That'd be one way to address this issue.
Yep.
Wait a minute. We'll open public comment in a while.
I mean, foundationally, nice thing about every subdivision I've ever been a part of is that there's a catch-all condition of approval that says, subject to all additional applicable state, federal, local regulations and approval. If the planning that has gone into this project for the last 18 months ends up yielding a lot, which can't, for whatever reason, accommodate a well or a septic system simultaneously, then what it means is they don't have a lot. And they've got to merge it with the lot next door because they can't develop it. And that is the fail-safe. That's sort of the safety valve that it sounds like Mr. Knapp is hoping for. Well, what if this, what if that, what if that? We cannot account for any possibility. I think that's what Attorney Inspector Morgan was talking about. But what we can say is we comply with the regulations as they appear in your book for now. If there are field circumstances which mean we cannot, then there's going to be a tough choice on the behalf of the developer. He can't get a permit. If he can't permit a septic system for individual lot, he's not developing the lot.
And I hear your concern that they're going to go to the
Yep.
ZBA and they're going to say, look, this is the situation I'm in. This is a hardship. It's not a legal hardship. And so the ZBA just needs to understand that.
Right, so action item on that one, and I'm sure it'll be in the letter that we're talking about, Laura, but we will talk to a septic contractor to just address the grade issue
Thank you.
and the pump issue.
Yep.
But otherwise, sounds like there's a consensus that we're satisfied with 5.3.218.
From? Yep. So just to recap, the issues I have.
I have one more though. I have that collector road.
Okay, can I just recap where I am?
Yep.
You would like to see an analysis of endangered and rare species on the property. You would like to see a watershed analysis for this property. We talked about a sediment and erosion control plan for this property, but I think what I heard was you want to know what's going to happen after development in terms of sediment and erosion control and stormwater, right? Homeowners Association, the backlot issue, building envelopes we just covered, and the septic pump issues. And then there's, yep, two more apparently.
I think one, two.
Joyce has one.
In page 60, alternative access design.
This is page 60 of the subdivision regulations.
I know you got, a variance for driveways off of Young. But the subdivision regulations, if you look at page 60, preferred subdivision frontage road alternatives, that is one that says to avoid. And preferred would be put a loop road in, or a collector road. Now, I know you did that to try to push the project forward away from the more sensitive things in the back. But during public comment, we heard a lot of comments about, safety of Young Road, the turns and the elevation changes, lines of sight. Having 2 points of access onto that road rather than, Chris? 10, and where it's in our regulations is, this is something to avoid. I mean, I'd just like to see a drawing that does it that way and what the impact would be to the property, impact to the areas in the back. I know it pushes the project, it impacts the project further back, but I think you have a balance here between environmental concerns and safety concerns. And to me, 2 points of access versus 9 or 10 is preferred. And I'd just like to see an alternative plan of that, show what it would look like and what the impacts would be to the sensitive areas in the back.
Just to let you know, he's looking at figure 4B, which is road design standards and guidelines. It's the lower left that says preferred subdivision frontage road alternative.
And the collector one is right there too. It's on the same page. You're looking diagonally across, the one right there. It's got the collector road one. So there's a loop one they show, and then they have a collector road option as well.
I'm sorry. Can I have a citation to the actual rule number that I'm looking at? Where I'm on page 60.
Might be page 51 and 52
Oh, 51 and 52.
on some of these.
I got an old one. Is that what
You
it
do.
is? I have an old one.
Just a couple of figures.
It's figure 4B.
That shows how it's lost.
I knew you had the wrong regs when you said page 60.
I had the wrong ones.
Page 50,
Under
51.
road design,
51 and 52.
figure 4B.
road design standards
find it?
12.2.1.
It's figure 4B.
Right.
Figure 4B.
Which is on page 51.
51,
So what I'm hearing is this is not necessarily a change they are demanding, but an option they would like to see you explore to know whether it's possible without impacting the sensitive environmental aspects of the property.
Okay.
Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
I wasn't here for it, but I understand that in October, there's already a waiver that's been granted addressing the site distance definition to allow for the usage of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials to accommodate and meet the site distance issue. So on some of it feels like we've gone through this and addressed it. That's why the curb cut issue went from 13 to 10 to minimize to the greatest extent possible the number of curb cuts. Again, the ZBA plan approval was 13 cuts. It's now 10. And we now have a waiver from this board in this hearing
Sorry, the ZBA approval is not for the number of curb cuts. It was from the 3 elements referenced in there, not
Okay.
the number of curb cuts.
But he's now talking about the waiver you granted, so.
And I think, I talked about this in the letter. I mean, I appreciate that this board has jurisdiction over the concerns of things like sightlines and curb cuts and public safety. I mean, the ZBA, which is the final arbiter of the zoning ordinance in this town and every town in New Hampshire, has looked at this and granted variance relief for these frontage subdivision lots on this road. And part of that analysis necessarily includes the consideration of whether what is being proposed at the time, 3 more curb cuts, would alter the essential character of the neighborhood or threaten the public health and safety. And the answer was no, it will not.
But they weren't granting a variance for the number of curb cuts. They were granting perimeter waivers and
Well,
and
they were
things like
granted,
that.
they're granting permission. One of the 6.2.6 waivers was to have driveways in the 100-foot buffer, as
Yes.
depicted on the plan,
Yes,
which at the time was
absolutely.
13 driveways onto Young Road.
Yep.
And now it's 10.
But that was an impact to the buffer, not necessarily the impact to the road.
All of these are within the 100-foot buffer.
Right.
So it's whether it's 1 or 13, that is what the waiver was in
Right.
reference to.
And this
Is
is in the
to the
subdivision
impact that
regulations
buffer.
as well, so this is.
I guess I'm back to my question about the waiver. Our interpretation of the granting of the waiver was that we are accommodating this alternative standard for site distance, which by definition is addressing the safety concerns related to curb cuts. So,
What I'm saying is, we have preferred access road definitions that should be done, preferred, and ones that we should avoid. Right now, you're showing the one, your design is the one we should avoid. And I'm asking to look at the one that's preferred under the regulations. And I recognize that they may have some impacts to the areas in the back, but I just want to make sure we balance those. I'm not saying for, a change. I want a alternative design so we can look at it and make a determination.
And I think even if you look at the plan set where you have lots, where you have lots 8, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, that very easily could accommodate a road in there. And I believe our engineer called that out as well on the fact that it's being split into 2 driveways as opposed to easily being made into a loop road as referenced under figure 4B that would actually accommodate this plan and eliminate the risk and the hazard coming out onto that area where you could pick up a couple, probably even a couple more of those lots and accommodate this in a better manner.
And the conservation too, they talk about maintaining scenic views and stuff like that. The loop road would better do that as well. So, I mean, I think it's reasonable. That's a reasonable alternative and it should be looked at.
And just when I'm looking at the waiver, it's referencing figure 4A, not figure 4B. And I wasn't here, I don't know anything about the waiver, but I'm just looking at it.
4A has to do with site distance.
Yep.
The waiver doesn't have anything, figures in the conservation.
4A.
Figure 4B.
The driveway section 12.3 points to figure 4A, which is found in the
Right,
road
this-
design section of the regulations when describing regulations for a residential driveway. Figure 4A is of a vehicle sitting at a functional intersection with a stop bar and a stop sign. Yeah, so this is what the waiver related to.
Waiver specific to how you assess site distances.
Yeah.
Not how many curb cuts.
Right.
So I don't think
Two
it
different-
bars.
Not relevant.
I don't think it's necessarily dispositive on the issue that's being discussed now. But again, I'm just seeing it for the first time.
And by putting the road in with those 2 long 20-foot apart driveways might also assist in making 19, 20, and 21 not backlots, because instead of having 50-foot frontage on a Class 5 road, they'd be on a private road.
We could loop in there and pick them all up.
Yeah, well, the rest of them are far away.
You wouldn't loop such a narrow area.
Loop it.
Cul-de-sac design.
Right. Because you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and these are the other 3 of the 8 backlots.
Loop in like this and access
Oh.
this from that way, you know what I mean?
You actually,
Yeah, I don't think that would,
you almost have 7 if you look at the next driveway over as well on it. But
All right, if we're going to have conversations, let's have them with the applicant and not each other.
um,
Joyce, you had another concern. What was it?
About lot shape.
Okay.
So 11.2.2 parentheses 2, to the maximum extent possible, all new lots should be rectangular in nature. Many of them are, but some of them aren't. And so I don't know if the attempt was made to the maximum extent possible to meet that requirement.
But I think we pointed out in the past that the conservation subdivision allows for creativity in lot. Approach that this is a conservation subdivision. So not a- In fact, a lot of the lots in the existing stormwater site to create. Creativity. Subdivision.
Or could you give me an opinion on which?
could I elaborate more before? And I had made notes on this as well under lot shape under 11.2.2 parents 1, the lot shall be shaped in a manner that promotes clarity of ownership. And and it specifically notes out that to the maximum extent possible, new lots shall be rectangular in nature under 2.2, under
2, parents 2, and then under 2, parents 3, no portion of the lot created under these regulations shall be less than 75 feet in width, except as provided for in subsection 11.2.4, creation of backlots. We've already commented on the backlots, and then when you look at it, one does with a 10-foot section does not create clarity in ownership. It actually creates more convoluted question around it, and it creates the irregular shape as noted and called out. And then, as I said, we had already addressed the backlot piece, 11.2.4 further on, and backlots, 2 backlots per subdivision.
So I think what the board is struggling with in terms of trying to reconcile the various provisions of the zoning ordinance and the subdivision regulations is that you want the benefits of calling this a conservation subdivision, but it doesn't really look like a conservation subdivision. So yes, conservation subdivisions allow flexibility in terms of lot shape and size, and they would even allow no lots. They would allow a 0 lot line. But if you look at figure 2A, which talks about poor cluster design, and lot 2B, which is good cluster design, I don't see any lots. I don't see very many backlots. I don't see any that are shaped like flags. I see regular lots. So it is a regulation that requires to the extent possible. So I think just addressing whether or not you have made the effort to the extent possible would perhaps address some of the board's concerns.
Same figure, that same figure you're talking, does maintain scenic views.
And get closer to it.
You know, this plan absolutely blocks the views. It puts all the houses in the frontage. Any views to Richardson Pond and that area back there are, you know, were inaccessible. Now you have a pathway down there, but the views are not maintained. That's why I kind of favor a loop approach, because that would maintain some views.
Indeed, did you have any more comments?
Yeah, just noting on that, kind of tying all of this together. I wanted to make sure that I do tie it together with the fact that under 1.5.2, which is conflicting provisions, and it specifically notes under there where any section of these regulations conflicts with another or with any other local regulations or ordinance, the requirement imposing the greater restriction or higher standard shall apply. So I just wanted to make sure we've talked a lot about this on where stuff crosses over, and it all ties together and is specifically called out under the validity section of 1.5.2 in our regulations, just to further bring the connectivity to it. My other concern was around driveways, and I specifically noted that on lot 1812 and lot 1813, the angle of the driveway is, I think it's like 16.8 or 18%. I'd have to go directly
The angle or the slope?
The angle at which it comes in. It does not bisect at the desired 90 degrees, which is referenced under our driveway standards, as well as our town of Barrington driveway regulations that we have. Also looking.
Which lots were those?
Lots
8,
8, 12, and 13. When I was looking at it, it's very tough to see, but it looks like it comes in at 20.49 degrees. And then from the center line, it pitches out to 26.28, which exceeds what the kind of relief setting is around our regulation on that.
Yeah, it's 30 degrees. You can take a look.
And then my other concern was around
The slope, there's a couple of lots that are between 8 and 10%, and they have a 4% angle out onto the road up at the, I'll call it the threshold, but that's not the right word for it. Sorry, my brain is. Apron, thank you. Where the desired apron is typically 1 to 2%, a minimum grade of 1%, and the desired 2%.
Is that in the driveway standards?
It's called out in our driveway standard where no residential driveway shall exceed a 10% grade or maintain a negative grade of less than 2% till it's beyond the ditch line. Less than 2%.
4% is more than 2%.
Sure that you.
Yes, that you shed water.
Yep.
Sorry, like I said, my brain now is. So. What was my other? My other concern around those was just looking at the pitch and the slope coming off those driveways when we talk about the safety factor. If somebody comes into that driveway in a inclement weather event, that when they slide, if they slide off that driveway, they are potentially in pretty significant peril with a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 slope that drops almost 10 feet down below to a point where they're going to do some pretty significant damage. Don't think that is in the best interest of our people, since we do have safety and applicability under 3.5 circulation. Under fire protection.
Parking and circulation in some situations.
It is.
He was gonna.
No, it's a zoning ordinance. 5. 1. Oh, nope.
You looking for?
Parking and circulation, but I wonder if
That
I went
sounds
and
like a site
plugged
plan
this
thing.
site plan, yeah,
Yeah.
I'll scrap that because we've already discussed that part. That's what happens when you flip around, you get multiple sections. That's where we. As I had noted the last time we met, I had concerns. There are 2, 1.4 and 1.5. We talk about the harmony of the land within the town, the lot shape and configuration. It specifically notes the protection of steep slopes, driveways, one to aid in the fire and the aspect as proper spacing and patterns.
So again, let's identify what our specific concerns are that aren't being met there.
Well, we've discussed the concern about, I think we've covered most of them as they reference.
Okay, good.
We did reference I propose. So as a professional 20+ year professional in the safety field, facilities and maintenance management, I have some direct safety concerns related to road access and the protection and well-being of people as they access these lots. And I have raised that concern specifically when the land is with regard to fire and EMS and access to those sites. I know they have a driveway. We have been presented with driveway sightline information.
based on the known travel patterns of those roads, as well as the speeds on those roads. And if anybody has actually driven it, you know it is, can be thoroughly dangerous at times for people. I won't walk my son down that road on it, but it has been specifically called out in nowhere that there is risk and danger associated with the many access points coming on.
And my understanding is that the board also plans to send this over to the fire chief, now that they have some more specifics that they didn't have before, to see if he has any concerns with the driveways. I think there's a distance from cisterns.
Yeah.
11.6.
11.6.
Fire protection.
The cistern services 11,000 drivable feet, which puts lots 16 through 23 beyond that distance. So maybe another cistern, or you can have the houses sprinkled. That's a option, but the fire chief will probably talk about that.
5-minute break.
Sure, of course. 5-minute break. Okay. Oh, I left the pile of crap here, sorry.
We're winding down with this one. Anyway. So I think we're for tonight. No.
Okay.
Talked about.
1,000 feet.
So within a development, this one has to
Yep. Drivable feet, not circular feet. That's what he's been, it's not in our regs, but that's been the fire chief's thing. Probably should.
So if you're building a development.
Kahuna, of course, is the
Oh, no, I'm sorry, it was wrong.
backlots.
We already talked about the backlots.
Sufficiently, you think that this is a important item. Okay.
I think we've talked about it, and I will emphasize it in my letter.
Okay, very good.
One final point I just want to bring up.
Yep.
I think there's a
Please.
couple more rounding up points. Do you need to wait for your client, Justin?
Yeah, we can wait.
This is
Yeah.
easy. We've already discussed it, but, you know, the engineering comments, he said that you have, you know,
If we're gonna talk about engineering comments, let's wait for the engineer. Is that fair?
yeah, I think
He's here.
It's coming.
it was mentioned that our engineering comments were that we have 3 and then a driveway right beside that should be combined. I know that, you know, 4 lots, if you accessing 4 lots, it triggers a road to town standards. So I know why you're doing that, but I mean, it looks like you're just trying to avoid doing the road, you know what I mean? So.
I thought you were recommending putting a road in.
Yeah, there's lots of, there's the 2 driveways that are side by side.
Right. So lot 18, 19, 20, 21 are all accessed from the same driveway?
And 22.
Yeah, it pulls in 22 on the right
22?
too. Yeah.
Those are all same driveway?
There are 2 driveways, one for 18, 19 and one for
20,
22,
21, 22.
22.
So the question was, why isn't that one driveway and a road, basically? One separate what?
So they were 20 foot apart and a 2 foot grade separation too? Yeah, I believe so. Just to avoid the
Yes.
road. Okay. Right. That's your prerogative, I guess. But it makes 3 of them back lots.
So the
19,
concern
20, and
is,
21.
rather than having 2 curb cuts so close together, why not have those 5 lots served by 1 road with 1 curb cut? And I think everyone understands that you don't want to have to build a road, but the concern is having those 2 curb cuts so close together.
Yep.
There's an interpretation issue that I haven't really. But we're referring to these as backlots. I mean, the definition of backlots inclusive that it doesn't have sufficient. There is no frontage requirement conservation lots. This is a conservation subdivision. The dimensional standards for detached units on individual lots is listed in Table 3 of Article 6 of the zoning ordinance. There doesn't appear to be a frontage requirement. So if there is no frontage requirement, how can it be a backlot?
I thought it was 75 feet.
It's a 75-foot lot width.
Because they're all assumed to be frontage lots. And that is represented under, item.
I mean, the Conservation Commission, the Conservation Board contemplates cluster development, condominiums, single-family condominiums where there's simply no lots at all. So no.
But that's not this. You're mixing 2 together that are not this. And if you look directly under, what is it, S4 or whatever one we were referencing earlier, it is not a cluster development. It is a conservation subdivision, and they're all proposed as frontage lots. And as I noted earlier, under 1.5.2, conflicting provisions will resort to the more stringent of the 2 standards.
But I hear what you're saying, but this comes back to the point I made earlier. You want the benefits of a conservation subdivision without actually looking like a conservation subdivision, and that's sort of what they're struggling with.
I appreciate the tension, but I don't agree with that characterization. We don't want the benefits of a conventional subdivision. We want the benefits of variance case. If you think about the tension that is revolving around this case, it is one issue. Why or how do you get, as you look at Jason Reamer's, how do you get to those inner loops and cluster development? What requires that in your subdivision? It's the requirement of the 100-foot buffer that says you can't have a structure, you can't have a road, you can't have a house lot. It has to be an undisturbed vegetated buffer. So when you have that requirement for a conservation subdivision, the only thing to do is to go inside of the lot with a new road or whatever. What happened here is, and in recognition for the unique property, which contains a prime wetland and about 300 acres of other land owned by the town, is that the ZBA, who has the say on this issue, said it it doesn't make sense to require the 100-foot buffer in this case because of the unique use of the property. So in this case, we're gonna say it's okay to have
The
driveways
setback.
in the 100-foot buffer. We're gonna say it's okay to have house lots within the 100-foot buffer. So I get it that it doesn't look like the figure that was drawn in the zoning ordinance, but it is relief that was obtained by the applicant.
I hear what you're saying, and I will look at this issue of how can they be backlots if there's no frontage requirement, because yes, there is a frontage requirement at the front setback,
Right.
which is
Which I understand we can apply.
Well, let me ask a question. If those lots we're talking about, why aren't they accessed with one driveway, one road? Why aren't you doing that? You have multiple driveways coming out onto it. I just don't think that makes sense.
Put
Sounds like
people
it's
in
more
jail.
putting a road in.
Well, and then in more academic. I wasn't here. I know what happened when a conventional subdivision could yield. So obviously there's a developer's component to this, where 23 lots could be accommodated in a conventional subdivision. Conservation development has its obvious benefits. There can be continuity. That proposed space with the other property owned by the town is a good. So if there's a benefit to doing it like this, that the not conventional conservation subdivision, but it was it's a product of a lot of work, experience that about this exact thing. Hung up on like the considerations that revolve around the 100 foot, but they have relief.
I think the position was, this is better because we're pushing it all forward.
Right.
You know, the plan I'm suggesting, confirm that or not. So basically, you're saying that makes all the sense in the world. All we're saying is give us some information to prove, to make us believe it, because right now I don't.
So I appreciate that you brought up the yield plan. In light of this and we're not recommending to make a motion to reconsider the yield plan or anything at this time, but looking at the information we have a lot more information when we look at our topographics here, which shows our rock formations are steeper than 35 pitches, things like that, I don't know if we all really appreciate it, and I know Mr. Allard specifically had real issues with the yield plan as it was brought up. And, that is an area that we could go back and look at when we talk about yield plan, but we're not making that motion at this point in time. The yield.
I'll point out I wasn't here.
Right.
Luckily for you guys.
And I don't want to get into a back and forth or anything confrontational, because I don't think that's going to serve anyone else's purpose. Does anyone else have any other issues they want to raise for the applicant? I think we've given you a very long menu. Like I said, I will do a follow-up letter. Are you going to open for public comments as well?
Yep.
Do you have anything you want to say to us?
Wait a minute, no, we haven't opened it yet.
No, thank you for your time. I mean, it's a deliberate process, and we appreciate it. And the best. I appreciate it. Second thing is just that we can distill this down to the differences.
Yes.
That may or may not indicate.
I will do my best.
Okay, open it to public comment. If anyone has a public comment, I'll set 3-minute timer.
Make sure that it's on green.
Daniel Air, 334 Old Turnpike. I need some clarification of what I heard here tonight. I understand the principles, a couple things that were brought up. So, on these steep driveways, I took on a nightmare, I understand that. But there's no rules saying you have to pay someone's driveway. Is that you have to do stabilization at the beginning. So what you are asking, what I heard tonight, is you want in a timely fashion, somebody has to maintain that road stays stable. Driveway road will keep it eroding forever, unless something is done. So, sounds to me that you're asking, after the natural growth comes in, that whoever buys a house needs, in a timely manner, do something to stabilize that road for no future problems. That's kind of disclosure that I heard. And then shit flows downhill. So mostly 20 feet off the building is the tank and then the slopes. When you get too close to the property lines, interferes with overload of nitrogens, and the wetlands could be overloaded and stuff. So I'm not an expert on this, but it really restricted the nitrogen overload. So it would lower the number of bedrooms. There's still at least bedroom can go anywhere. You can pump it uphill or you can flow downhill. It's just on the load on the other one, it will restrict the number of the bedrooms. But that's why I'm saying clarification. So you asked, well, just anyone could pump it. I don't think that's relevant to this.
Rick, your comments to the board?
No, I was
Yes. Oh, okay.
to
I thought you were looking over here. Okay.
No, it was brought up by the engineers about the capacity of a service. I don't think the public that's not an answer. And your regulation, there's no, you can't force someone to pave their driveway. But you can, because of the slopes and stuff, and the sediment after it's stabilized, I think you could ask at a time and manner or show how they can keep it stabilized. There's all kinds of pavement, all kinds of options you could do if you can maintain it. That's why I think the board was trying to ask. It wasn't clarified to me. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else like to speak? Forward. Name, please.
Paul Panish, 101 Ross Road. I'm also a commissioner with the Conservation Commission. I have a couple of comments. The first one is in regard to Joyce Capiello's request for the environmental assessment. Some time ago, the Conservation Commission raised the issue of vernal, which had not been addressed in the studies that were done on this property, and it has not been addressed since, and I would really appreciate it if you would do that. Any further environmental studies that are done, getting to a very good time of year for doing those kinds of assessments. So it should be much easier than it would have been at this point. The other comments I have to make are in regards to the attorney's letter, specifically on Article 6, Section 6.1 zoning ordinance. I can't speak for the Conservation Commission because we haven't had a chance to meet since these were submitted or posted or whatever. But I believe my statements are consistent with previous comments from the Commission. And nothing in the update. I appreciate the fact that you've added, or that the client has added the conservation easements to this. I'm not going to speak to whether or not we would be willing to take those on without some other provisions being put in there. Someone else may want to speak to that afterwards. However, that nothing in the updates has changed my opinion that this development makes a mockery of the intent of a conservation subdivision's objectives as stated in zoning ordinances 6.1 paren 1 to paren 9. It also ignores key guidelines, the core of which is clustered development, which is emphasized throughout the descriptions, both the planning board and mainly in the planning board document. This is very clearly demonstrated in subdivision regulations 10.1, authority and purpose, where it states the planning board may approve the creation of conservation subdivisions, which are also referred to as cluster subdivisions. Clustering is very key statements. This is also implied in the zoning ordinance in section 6.3.2 paren 3, where it states the planning board may also require an applicant to submit a second conceptual development plan, a yield plan, that illustrates a conventional subdivision layout based on the town's zoning and subdivision standards for a non-clustered development on the site. Once again, bringing up the issue of clustered developments. Those are the main points I wanted to make. I'd also just like to note that the zoning board didn't consult and isn't required to consult with the Conservation Commission for contributions. However, from our past statements, we definitely disagree that this plan acts to conserve the characteristics of the property. I personally urge the planning board to use whatever discretionary power you have regarding intent or technical features to deny this plan.
Thank you. I'm Doug Bogan. I'm chair of the Conservation Commission. I agree with much of what the previous speaker said. Again, though, the commission hasn't had an opportunity to look at these latest proposals, so I can't speak to whether we'd approve or not. But just concerning the conservation easements and the other open space, we certainly prefer to have a formal easement. We've seen other developments where there wasn't that level of protection, and that would certainly be preferable. We do have concern, though, over the neighborhood easement, I guess to call it, what the neighborhood association would manage. While it's certainly fine to have those areas not open to the public, I think we would be concerned about the maintenance of them. We've certainly seen problems in the past with homeowners groups that don't really exist, that maybe got a good start but didn't really do the job in outgoing years. And with an area this sensitive and this challenging, I think, in terms of the terrain, I think it's a problem that we would have the area that's really the most sensitive right along the prime wetland, which is basically the whole buffer for the development, between the development and the wetland, be managed by the homeowners association. So I think our preference would be that we have some jurisdiction there to monitor the site, to determine whether there is encroachments. We've certainly seen in other places that things happen, it's downhill, gravity takes its effect. And certainly in terms of the runoff issues, we'd want to monitor that as well, because this is one of the most sensitive areas in the town, and we want to make sure that it is protected in the future. So again, we want to look more closely, learn more about the proposal, but that's my initial thoughts at this point. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else like to speak?
Glenn Caverly, 160 Young Road, Barrington. Well, I have a few concerns. Number one, I don't understand how we can call these individual lots. If you were, say, to buy lot 13, how would you develop your driveway without encroaching upon other lots? And this is true for a good many of the lots. You can't develop them without encroaching upon other lots. So how can you call them an individual lot and not a full development? I think there's no way you can call that an individual lots, because you can't build on them without encroaching upon adjacent lots. That's one point. Another point, I was a contractor, excavation contractor for many years. There is a ruling on the height of a septic tank that you can pump, and it's from the bottom of the tank to the level of where the truck is parked. It's 15 feet. And I don't see how a lot of these systems will be able to meet that requirement. Another thing I think should be shown on plans is fill extensions, not only for the driveways, but for proposed housing, because the fill extensions are going to be tremendous. Some of these lots are going to be, probably 40 to 50% fill extension. There's no way of escaping it. There's no way of escaping some of these lots with the slopes. In order to get a 3-to-1 slope to meet from this, we'll say the back of the foundation, you're going to have to go out there 75, 100 feet. This thing's going to get in my way again. I think they should demonstrate that on the plans so that you folks can see how much land is going to be disturbed and how many trees and vegetation is going to be destroyed. And I don't think there's any way of doing that without it being demonstrated on the plans. That's all I have.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Robert Cavalier, 150 Young Road. I agree with the concerns that you guys had and addressed at the beginning of this with whose responsibility these lots are going to be after the fact. If you buy a house and first snowfall, your roof caves in because they didn't put enough nails in it, whose responsibility is that? I wouldn't think that's the homeowner's. So if you buy a house and first heavy rainfall, half your yard washes down into Richardson's Pond and you got to replace thousands of dollars worth of loam, who's footing that bill? So I completely agree with those concerns. Something interesting that the lawyer brought up kind of reinforces a point that I've been making this whole time. He called this a frontage development, and it's a conservation subdivision on a technicality. That to me says that they're picking and choosing from each regulation to benefit themselves. They're getting benefits of a conservation subdivision in the form of smaller lots, all packed closer together, while seemingly disregarding all of the benefits for the community and the ecosystem. There's so much intent in the conservation subdivision regulations that just seem to be completely disregarded. And there's, I guess, question about whether you can enforce intent or not. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but this Hanover versus, it was the Hanover versus Dartmouth court case that they had brought up. I don't really think it helps them much, but I feel like that helps out the people that are opposed to this. The Supreme Court emphasized that site plan review cannot be reduced to the mechanical process of determining conformity to specific zoning and site plan regulations. Basically saying that, just because you meet the bare minimum for regulations doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do or it should be approved. That's saying you need to look at these and look in the gray area and look at the intent of this regulation. I know they're saying it's just intent, we can disregard it, but you need to look at the intent, because that conservation subdivision regulation is like 90% intent. So if we can't enforce the intent of that regulation, it's essentially a loophole for builders to exploit to get the benefits of smaller lots and just, like I said, disregard the impact to the ecosystem and the community. So please take a look at the intent of that regulation. And I do not feel like this meets the intent in any way, shape, or form of a conservation subdivision. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Brian Lindsay, 155 Young Road. And the number you're looking for the 15 feet from the bottom of the thing, I can give you that. It's 1010.051. I'll give it to you there. What's really amazing is the amount of driveways there that are going to be 10% on a 10% on all of them on the whole length of the thing, and that's like at lot 140 feet. The driveway they're showing is 10% all the way. 2 is 145 feet. It's 10% the first third of the way. 300 feet on 3 and 4, 10% for 200 feet. Lot 6, 10% all the way with 115 feet. 7, 90 feet, 10% all the way. 290 feet at 9 and 10 is 10% all the way. I mean, it's going to be tough in there, and it's hard for me to picture that what it shows on there. It's going to be an ugly, ugly place.
Anybody else? Is there anybody online?
If there's anybody online for or against the application, please raise your hands and take yourself off mute if you would like to comment. Mr. Chairman, I don't see anybody that would like to comment for or against the application.
Okay, be closing public comment. If you have any, go ahead.
I just wanted to, Mr. Passade, or Attorney Passade, Justin made a comment earlier asking about where the connectivity was in the regulation, and it's really under 10.2 under compliance with the regulation, and the second section of it is specifically notes articles as well as other applicable provisions contained wherein or contained elsewhere in the town's subdivision and site plan review regulations that would otherwise be applied to a conventional non-cluster subdivision. So that's where the connection is made between this gray area that we keep waffling back and forth. Directly addresses it under 10.2. Thank you.
Comments? Would you like to comment on any of the public comments?
No, I mean, I think for the technical stuff, we have our homework and we'll look forward to.
Sorry, just let me get the microphone.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Can't jump up fast enough. Or make sure it's green.
There we go. So we appreciate the comments. When it comes to the technical concerns, we'll address them in response to the letter that we'll anticipate from Attorney Inspector Morgan. I would suggest respectfully to the gentleman who referenced the Dartmouth v. Hanover case, that case really stands for the opposite of what it was suggested it stands for. I mean, that case, the result of that case was the Supreme Court saying, hey, Hanover Planning Board, you can't deny applications on ad hoc determinations. You have to look at your regulations, and if the application meets the regulations, the letter of the regulations, it ought to be approved. So I think that's what the point of this discussion in our letter has been, and certainly appreciate the involvement of Attorney Inspector Morgan, because we want to identify specifically where the board thinks we do not comply and then respond to it. And we may not get to the consensus on the issue, but at least we'll know the game plan and the roadmap that we're playing from. And I think that's the point of this meeting was. So we appreciate everyone's time.
I would just like to make a comment about the width of the lot, even at the road. 1122 parentheses 2 of the subdivision regulations states that no portion of a lot created under these regulations shall be less than 75 feet in width. But that's something to look at, I guess. 11.2.
Yes, sir.
Any other comments by the board? Oh,
Another comment, I would like to amend, I asked for the wildlife endangered species to include the language that we have in 7.6.4, which is to address measures taken to preserve and improve on-site wildlife habitat. It should cover a variety of.
Did you want to capture any of the vernal pool information?
Well, that is included.
Oh, that's included, okay.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm hearing is we're going to continue this meeting. Do you think you will be ready to do this in April?
I don't think there's any harm in continuing it to April, and if more.
So is April 2nd your next meeting?
Yes.
okay.
So someone could make a motion.
I would just note that I don't mean to interrupt. I know that Laura's a very busy woman, and I'm hoping for the letter as soon as possible. I know there's a planning board regulation that says 10 business days before the next hearing you ought to reply. Is there any leeway or flexibility with that regulation so that we'll do the very best to reply within 10 days? We would appreciate moving forward and keeping with the 2 April, but to the extent it's a late letter and then it's like we got a real condensed timeline to reply.
As you know, next week is town meeting.
Yes, that's right.
And I am tied up all day tomorrow working on CLE materials. So I will do my best to work on this weekend and get it to you early next week.
As Chris mentioned, you can schedule it. We now don't require you to come in and ask for a continuance. You just send a letter in. So, you just ask for the next meeting. So if you want to go to the second, we can target that, and then whatever reason doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you.
I make a motion to continue this application to the next to the April 2nd meeting.
I'll second it.
Roll call.
Nap aye.
Capello, aye.
That's your eye.
Alan aye.
Driscoll, aye. Town planner, we're all set here for this case. Okay, thank you.
I didn't say anything, so you didn't have it.
She took it from you.
What?
A couple of minutes to get ready for the next case.
Oh, I was thinking you were talking about. Second. Sorry there. It's okay.
Chair,
New application, I'm sorry.
I would just like to note that the application coming before the conceptual review is my employer, and so I need to use myself from the board.
Okay. Get a comfortable seat. See you later. Okay, the new application is lot 238-44-1
Sit next to him.
and lot 44V24 design review. The owner is HBBC LLC, lot 44-1, and Virtuous Reality LLC, lot 44. Good evening.
Oh, wait, let me get you the. Got it?
Still think we should find an office for him so he can just, leave all his gear here.
Mr. Chair, members of the board,
Good evening.
Christopher Barry with Barry Surveying and Engineering, representing TurboCam this evening. And I'm proud to say I designed this one all wrong too. I'm just kidding.
This one might go smoother.
Maybe.
Isn't this been fun?
As you know, TurboCam has occupied the space along 125 now for a good number of years, close to 20, since the original conception of the plans of their existing site. That site has gone through a number of expansions in the past, and I think, as we all know, they've been instrumental in purchasing other parcels along Route 9 in Barrington and have expanded their operations in other areas. And they're now looking to expand part of their main campus onto an abutting lot that was subdivided off in the early 2000s, approximately 2004, for the purposes of.
Yep. No comments, please, or take your conversations outside if needed. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
So they'd like to expand their existing campus onto the lot that was created, which is 44.1, for the purposes of constructing approximately 63,000 square feet of light manufacturing space, which would also include some additional office space. As you could probably tell from our design review submission, we are quite heavy into the design of this project. And while we were finalizing quite a few of the construction details and permitting details, we wanted to take the opportunity to supply a design review application before the board so that you could take a look at what we had worked on apply some input so that maybe if there are improvements needed, we can incorporate those into the project design. Essentially, what we're looking to do is create an intersection with the existing out intersection that they have for the loop road to create a new loop road around the proposed light manufacturing facility. This would generally operate in a one-way fashion once you get beyond the parking array at the front of the site. Stormwater on site is handled through a various number of means. We have small detention cells, which then are routed to treatment cells, and those are then routed to infiltration cells, and then are discharged overland to the Malago Brook. There is a large section of this property and the abutting property, lot 44, that is covered by a conservation easement already. And so there's a section of this parcel that's encumbered, mostly the wetland buffer, but there is a large section of upland at the back of the site and areas around the wetlands that are upland outside of the buffers that are covered in the conservation easement and are no longer developable under that easement. This project would require a conditional use permit for the use in the zone, and which is applicable to the planning board. It would require a conditional use permit for the size of the building within the zone. So 50,000 square feet is permitted within the zone, and it applies a conditional use permit to any building that is greater than that within the zoning. So it delegates that responsibility to the planning board. We have filed for a variance within for the zoning board of adjustments to allow for a small retaining wall to be constructed at the front of the site, as well as some crash materials at the front of the site, which would be located within the existing green belt on site. The purpose of the retaining wall is a little counterintuitive. We had originally designed the site to not require the retaining wall, and what that created at the front of the site were some steep slopes that went down into the stormwater cells. And what we were finding is that we weren't able to really revegetate the front of our site in the greenbelt buffer because those slopes were so steep. So we were having trouble getting the plantings to stay where we wanted them on site, making sure that they wouldn't erode, root masses would take, things like that. And so we basically determined that if we benched the site and created a small wall, we could create sort of a green buffer along Route 125, and then another tier above that. Closer to the building, we could create an additional tier. So we felt as though this were a better design within the green belt to actually request a variance for that small retaining wall and help break up the front of the site moving forward. The site does require a 9.6 for the impact within 50 feet of a wetland. That wetland was originally much smaller. It was increased in size through the stormwater management that was done on the original TurboCam site. So that site did not manage volumetric controls or probably peak rates to the extent that we're required to now. And as it discharged into the wetland, it grew over time. When it grew, it then now requires a 50-foot buffer around it, and we're proposing a roadway through that 50-foot buffer. We're very careful not to develop within the wetlands itself, and we're very careful to ensure that all of the stormwater from that site goes away from that wetland and away from the remaining buffer and into our stormwater systems. The project is obviously controlled by an NHDOT access, and we have filed with NHDOT as a preliminary permit, and then a full traffic analysis is still being conducted by TEP LLC, which will be required by DOT, and we'll submit that to them when we receive it as well. There's a portion of this that's sort of a shared component between the parcels. So the building size that's needed currently for TurboCam to continue its operation is such that the parking demands can't be satisfied on the lot 44.1 site. And so we're proposing to add additional parking on lot 44. Additionally, the existing TurboCam site needs additional parking as well. And so what we're proposing is that you'll essentially see 2 applications come before you very shortly for revisions to the existing turbo campsite to increase the parking capacity there. And of course, the site plan review that's required for the new light manufacturing facility on lot 44-1. There are 2 wells on site that are non-transient, non-public systems that currently service the existing turbo campsite. We would propose to add our load to those wells as well. And then our sewage disposal system would actually take place on lot 44, so that it could all be managed on one site moving forward. The site is sized and disturbance such that we would require an alteration of terrain permit. We have reached out to the Division of Historical Resources, and we have hired an archaeologist to review the site. He has published a study that there are no areas of interest on this project site, and the Division of Historical Resources has approved that study. And we have filed with the Natural Heritage Bureau. There are species of concern in the Malago Brook, and we have hired a wildlife specialist who has started their work with Fish and Game to ensure that the protections that we have designed in place on our plans are sufficient, and that the existing easement around the Malago Brook is sufficient as well. As part of the submission, we did supply the loose architecturals that we have been working on with MSA. So any comment that you might have on those would be good to take back to the design team and the applicant for input and potential revision. So I guess with that, I'd be happy to try and answer any questions that you might have on the design review application, and that way we can implement any potential changes in the full design.
I just have a question to go back to your comment about the pending another application. That is just for the parking. I see where you have a box over here pointing to the parking. Has nothing to do with using the recreation field for a structure or anything, just parking.
I think there's the existing well house that's on site is a little jinky. So we're proposing that that be actually revised and constructed as a proper 20 by 20 well house structure.
Okay.
There are other minor revisions throughout that site that would be included in that site review, but the majority of it is additional parking for both the existing site and the expanded site.
Parking shown in orange.
Yeah, those are sort of conceptual placeholders.
Sure.
For now.
Okay. And would have comments, questions?
Well, first of all, thank you for that explanation of the green belt. I couldn't figure out what was going on there around drainage and the 2 levels of trees. My question is, where's the public access to the hiking trails in the conservation easement?
So currently, the access is through the turbo campsite. There is a connection onto, what's that?
Ham Road?
It's a Province Road, and there's a connection onto 125 and along the frontage of 125.
Nowhere to park there.
There isn't. So that area is really not encouraged, though you can walk around. What this site does is, if you'll notice off the southern end of the building, we're proposing a staircase there through a series of retaining walls. And what we would encourage people to do is potentially park within the parking area here at the new facility, use the sidewalk down to that staircase, and then that is designed to connect right onto the trail system there.
Which page has the staircase on it? Go the front page here. Oh, here. Okay. Right. Thank you.
On the rendering of the western front facing, is there any HVAC or anything proposed to be on the roof?
Yes, but
Those are the red little boxes you show on.
I'll have to look to see. I know
that would be sheet. It's actually a Market Square.
Yeah.
8.
So I'm really not sure what those risers are on the roof, but the HVAC would sit behind a parapet wall. So it wouldn't be visible.
It would be screened.
It would be screened from 125. It would be likely visible from the back, but there would be either a parapet there or required safety fencing.
Kind of looks like a storage unit building, doesn't it?
Well, it's not, I was thinking about that. It's a, not as overwhelming, and it will employ maybe 100 people.
Yeah,
100
that's a
and-
good thing.
150 are
And the
proposed.
storage, got one old guy sitting in there at his desk, right? So,
We've also made improvements. We've made improvements to the architecturals. I think Andy can attest my verboseness on how this building needs to look for us to receive our conditional use permit from this planning board. And so there have been vast improvements to the architectural design since we submitted for the design.
okay.
I have an HVAC related question. It's not a planning board question, but so it doesn't matter. But I see you have a location for 3 pads for the cooling towers.
Yes.
Why are those there? Why don't you put them on the roof? They perform better on the roof.
Because it's really tough to hold, to put a cooling tower.
This is, you got to
It's an
introduce yourself.
It's an engineering thing.
Andrew Knapp,
question.
Director of EHS Facilities and Maintenance for TurboCam. It is really challenging to put a tower that is filled with water that holds 2,000+ gallons of water at 8.34 pounds per gallon on top of a roof. And so ideally what we do is we set it outside on the ground. We have multiple cooling towers, and then we actually utilize the cooling tower as a way to dump our excess heat. And we do that because it means we're spending less electricity cost, we're creating less of an impact on the environment, and we tie our equipment in. So the amount of tons of cooling that we historically need to run a manufacturing plant is about 50% of what we would need comparatively to a standard conventional manufacturing design.
Yeah, but basically, most people put them on the roof because you get better airflow on the roof. You kind of tuck them in a corner here.
Mhm.
Plus, they missed a little bit, so there's no really people on the roof. And so, I'm just used to seeing them on the roof, so that's just my comment. I mean, roof load, another suggestion is, has nothing to do with a planning board. But if you add like a 15 pounds per square foot of roof load, gives you the option of doing solar panels in the future or green roof. So it's cheap to do it now, and it gives you that option down the road. So when my projects, I add to the roof load capacity just to provide that option down the road.
We are looking at things like that. The challenge is when you look at the parapet around the wall, the only side that isn't covered with a parapet is the south side, or the east side. The north side, west side, and south side all have the parapet around it to, one, create a means of fall protection for people, and two, also to shield and hide all of that ancillary equipment that would be up on the roof space.
They had what, 6 or 8 feet to the
No, I believe it's about 4.5 feet.
4.5? Okay.
Solar panels are only about 4 feet.
42 inches, yeah.
Solar panels are only about 4 feet high. But if you do it down the road, then you're going to put in a balancing system. Balance means weight. And a lot of times you can't do it on a building that's not designed for it.
So there are different thoughts around TurboCam, and I will share mine. There are people who like solar panels, and if you look at our B2 building, we have solar panels on that building. When you look at what it makes up for my energy load, I'll put it that what it actually does for energy is marginal in impact at best.
Yeah, it's not a planning board. Just the only planning board related question I have is, you have kind of a one-way traffic flow and a two-way traffic flow. How are you going to control the transition for that? You see that corner right there? You also go from two-way to one-way?
On the south corner.
I mean, what is your plan to control not cause confusion? No, but see, it's two-way here and that's one-way here.
I think the
Transitions from two-way right there to one-way.
Well, they show a sign there, I guess, at that point.
But I'm assuming you're going to bring the trailer trucks around, they can back into the loading bay, right?
Yeah, I think, I see what you're talking about, Ron, there. I think it's best to have two-way at the front of the site, and then the transition should be one-way throughout the rest of it. I think there's an arrow that's probably should be flipped around there, so it's one way from the corner all the way around.
Do have a sign there.
Okay.
people don't pay attention to signs, I guess.
Yeah, that's,
You can't fix stupid.
they're employees, so eventually they get the hang of it. But it's good to have two, I think it's good to have one way there, because if you have if you have a tractor trailer queuing up, you can actually occupy one of those lanes while waits for the loading dock to free up.
Yeah.
So I like the plan, it was just, we had transitioned from one to the other, it's just a safety concern.
Yep.
Would comment on your very robust planting scheme. Very impressive, actually.
Very impressive. I think we're very lucky at Turbo Can in the community, and it's great that they're expanding. I'm very pleased as a citizen to see this. We're lucky to have Turbo Can here, and they're doing well, and they're expanding here in Barrington.
So the 6-foot white spruce, any idea what the growth would be looking at? I've seen some spruce grow a foot a year, but.
Yeah, so some of these species, and we'll have to talk to Andy about this, some of these species are going to need to be maintained or they will get unruly. We have some spruce outside of my office that are 30, 40 feet tall, and that's going to be unruly for their site. A lot of the species that we chose will grow rather quickly and will grow to about 10 feet, and if they're maintained properly, they should maintain that. Specifically, the species that we have from the wall, between the wall and the building. The ones at the front of the project site probably need a lot less maintenance, and we probably want them to grow and look a little more natural.
Okay.
But the ones between the wall and the edge of pavement should be maintained, every few years.
And above the subsurface wetland, there'll just be turf, right?
Subsurface gravel wetlands? It's just grass. It's
just grass.
Just a grass
Right,
material.
turf. Yeah. Okay.
We don't want the root structures of the trees.
Sure.
getting
Oh,
into this.
absolutely. Yeah.
A lot of the issues you have on this really are ZBA issues, and really for us, really the only real issue is probably the wetlands buffer.
9.6 and then the 2 conditional use permits.
And you guys weighed in on this, or you said the new Barrington method, 20 feet, right? So that should be a non-issue, so. No?
No.
Did I read it wrong?
He's gonna have to come up.
Yeah, let's hold that question until anybody else have comments for
Well,
Chris.
Chris, I do have a question, 2 of them, in fact. I know the original TurboCam, they recycle their hot water from their machines to melt their snow and stuff. Would they do that there too, to kind of eliminate the impact of sand and salt?
I don't have the answer to that one. You planning that?
That is an item that we're looking at with our concrete, is looking at glycol circulation through the concrete and how we could best manage that. Obviously, making sure the sub base is put in correctly and well, so that we don't have any problems with that. We do use an environmentally friendly glycol for that, in case, God forbid, you ended up having a rupture, and we would be able to address that right away.
And then you'll take care of, I know you will, the electric pole, because I know on your 9 building, Route 9, that you have so many, what do you call them, energy efficient machines that you weren't expecting to happen, and it's not being able to circulate.
So if anybody's been by there within the last month or 2, you've seen Eversource out there working. There are now 2 new poles set out by the road. Those poles now run down into an underground vault. They feed to an underground vault, which has a sector cabinet, and it actually diverts power, so that power is already prepped for the expectation of building this building, as well as it breaks the connectivity of power so it doesn't run in series around. That way, if we lost power in any one configuration, we can isolate individual transformers, since we have 3 main transformers feeding the main campus, and this building is likely proposed to have 2 transformers feeding this site. So it is designed so that the building can operate and run 24/7, 365, even with the potential loss of power.
but is set up so that if we had to disconnect power in any one configuration with Eversource, we have thought through what the impact of that is and how do we adapt for it. Also, to address the question around the management of trees, I am fortunate enough to have a New Hampshire certified landscaper on staff who's part of my environmental team. She was our landscaper, and then I recruited her into our EHS team, our environmental health and safety team. And she is consulted and frequently provides oversight with our projects and any work we're doing on our landscaping around the site. She's also a certified green landscaper. And pesticide applicator as well. So she is very well versed in landscape management plans, and the use of them.
Okay. And I just have one more question. I don't know if it'd go to Chris or to you. I don't know. So you guys can double up on this. So you have, Andy, question. How many people work at the main plant?
About 340.
Okay, and
across
Chris, you
three
said there's
shifts.
about 100, there'd be about 100 in the new plant? Did I hear right? Or
So the new plant will hold 150. There's going to be an interim period where Andy probably has more details on this than I do. There's going to be an interim period where there's some shuffling of personnel, and then reuse and reestablishment of personnel in the existing building.
Okay, so what my question is, and you know where I'm going with this, it's going to bring a lot of people that have families, that have children. Is there any way that there is a way that you could build some kind of childcare center on that property to help house those?
I would say not on this site. This site is
I know you have some
fully
of that.
utilized. There is
Food for
work.
thought.
There is future work being looked at for that,
Okay.
but I really can't comment much more than that
No,
at this
and
time.
I just
Yeah.
planting the seed because you know that is a big problem here.
Mhm.
Okay.
With the movement of staff, approximately what we're looking at is there will be 100 employees that will move from the current 607 Caliph Highway, which is the B1 building campus, over to this new building. So it actually will just initially be a shift of employees,
Okay.
and then there will be some spot filling that takes place. And then the expectation around it is to look at where we may have some other offsite work or future growth that's already starting to materialize will fill in the void in this location.
That's good. Thank you.
They will add jobs.
Another question? And I don't even, hey, I've heard these guys and they're professionals, so I'm trying to live up to their, their standard. As you
Not
notice,
talking about
I'm
me.
quite quiet at times. But,
Except for when you're yelling at me.
no, I never do that. Okay, so let's get back to professional. So coming in and out on the highway.
Yep.
Will you have a second lane? I don't know what they call it. A turn lane that will help support, because you've got the school right there.
So that's one of the things that our traffic engineer is looking at currently. This is the type of analysis that's a little outside of my breadth. And so we've hired a traffic consultant to take a look at that. Currently, there is a deceleration lane into the project site. And what we're really critically looking at is when the restriping took place on 125 this summer, whether or not the lane width in the southbound direction is sufficiently sized to allow for people to safely navigate around people turning into the turbo campsite, and whether or not DOT will actually require a full turn bay into the site in the southbound direction.
Thank you. Any more questions by the board before we open to public comment? Hearing none, public comment is open. Please come forward. You have 3 minutes.
Daniel here, 334 Old Concord Turnpike. I like the business coming in here for as a taxpayer, generate the tax base. And on my property on Route 4, I have a natural rock wall and tee it up and stuff. And it is unbelievable, the difference in noise and stuff. It's really quiet and stuff. That will be a benefit on this property and the wildlife by doing them tiers and stuff. It's like night and day. And mine's all natural, but I like hearing that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
Doug Bogan, Chair of the Conservation Commission. You've, I'm sure, seen our written comments, and I won't add more, say much about it, just that, we recognize this is a challenging site, given the size of the facility and the existing conservation easement. So we appreciate the efforts by TurboCam to make it work. We are concerned anytime there's an encroachment on a wetlands buffer, but we also recognize that they're making good efforts to mitigate the impacts, reduce the runoff. In contrast to the previous project, I think this is certainly a much better approach. Obviously, they're apples and oranges, but we just do want to recognize that. We look forward to working with them to come up with the final plan. We feel that the engineered design to deal with the runoff will certainly be, a good approach to minimize the impacts to the wetlands, although, I'm sure there will be some, but we I guess, leave it at that for now.
And you did say that we'll make some efforts to keep wetlands recharged.
Yeah, that was certainly one of the concerns. Obviously, if you're reducing the runoff going into the wetland, we want to make sure that there is still some recharge, and they've given us some assurance that can be, they can add more water from the up gradient wetland and monitor it as well. We'd like to see that done just to make sure, obviously, that it doesn't dry up, Right. Regarding the Barrington method, we did do an analysis just to see how it worked out. It may not be the best example of how to use that for the 9.6 waivers, but it, essentially says that, we'd only be able, using that plan, it would be a 20-foot encroachment maximum, whereas most of the project design is 40 to even 50 feet, pretty much no buffer left. There's that information, but it may not be the best application for that plan, but my associate may have more to say on that, or if you have other questions about that, we can say more. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just to briefly address that, Paul Panish, 101 Ross Road, Commissioner on the Conservation Commission. I did do a full analysis using the new tool, and as Doug mentioned, it did imply that our advice would be that not to exceed 20 feet into the buffer, and we're removing the buffer. But the mitigation methods that are being put in place aren't anything that we have experience with or knowledge of, and they should account for factors that tool is not intended to look into. So we comments on that.
Okay.
Although I will say the fact that it came up with 20 feet, I think is a positive. If you ran that method every time and it came up with 50 feet every time, it would start to lose credibility. You know what I mean? It can't come up with maximum every single time. So the fact it came up with a lower one in this case, I think is a good thing for the credibility of the new method.
And I mean, as you know, this is a trial period for this tool, and this did bring up some other issues with that. I don't know if I need to go into that.
Probably not.
Write us a letter. All right, any more public comments? Closing public comments? Nobody's online. Board have any more questions, queries?
I mean, I think the big issues here are ZBA issues, and hopefully those, the 50-foot buffer, most of the properties along that area, they don't seem to, maintain a 75-foot buffer on about 125. I don't know, 50,000 square feet. I don't know where that came from. It's pretty obvious. So,
Yeah.
both for the ZBA issues, I mean, ZBA decisions, but they don't seem to be, they seem to be the major issues here, and they don't seem to be a big issues to me. Hopefully, everything goes smoothly.
Okay. Yep, I get a vote to close design public hearing. Is there a motion? I'll make that motion, seconded by Paul.
Aye, me.
Oh, Donna, I'm sorry.
I was chastised for a second.
And roll call,
Masucci, aye.
Capello, aye.
Tessier, aye.
Alan, I.
Driscoll, aye. Thank you. Anybody, new business, anybody, or
Should announce that Andy's back.
want to get out of here?
You should announce that Andy's back.
Oh, yeah, Andy is regaining his seat as a full
Andy, are
member.
you back on the board?
Andy,
Andy's
Andy.
back on the board.
will you come help us close this out?
I'm here.
Anybody have any more business? If not, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
No.
No. I think,
I think Donna just.
Donna made it.
yeah.
I motion to, it's over with. Masucci, aye.
Capello, aye.
Tessier, aye.
Alan, nay.
You can stay here then.
5 o'clock to 9 o'clock, you're just not enough. I want more.
Are you ordering pizza?
Okay, we're done.